It's Sunday, February 23, 2025. I'm Anthony Davis. Welcome to the Weekend Show, where we make the time to consider the news of the week. You can support my work and independent journalism at patreon.com/5minutenews. Our guest today is a Democratic strategist and commentator who's receiving millions of views on TikTok and Instagram and here on YouTube as well. Sawyer Hacket, welcome back to the Weekend Show.
Great to be with you, Anthony. How are you?
Very good. And I'm very thrilled that you're here because, people need to know that there are people out there who are pushing the messaging and who are saying all the right things. And we are currently witnessing the dismantling of our constitutional framework. And as Russell Vogt, the new head of the Office of Management and Budget, described, we have entered a post-constitutional order. This represents nothing less than a gradual unraveling of American progress through history. It's not just an attack on the Constitution, it's also an assault on history itself. One example of this is the weakening of the civil service. And from the progressive era to the New Deal, the Great Society, these institutions have shaped the nation. And now we see direct challenges to birthright citizenship and the 14th Amendment. This is the deconstruction of the administrative state as Project 2025 described it. Where do the Democrats even start with all this stuff?
Yeah, I think, Democrats find themselves in the political wilderness at a time where it's absolutely the worst time to be in the political wilderness. We've been, locked out of power. We don't control the House. We don't control the Senate. We don't control the White House, and we don't control the courts. And at the same time, we have a, wannabe autocrat, or, at this point, I think it's probably fair to say that he is an autocrat who is allowing a rogue billionaire and a team of unelected minions to come in, root out essentially anybody who has been a public servant for decades, working on vital programs for the American people, for working families. And they're dismantling I think what they see as the entire image of the federal government so that they can build it up to benefit themselves. And I think, whether it's the corruption that we're seeing coming out of Musk or the corruption we're seeing coming out of Trump with these Oval Office business deals that he's making, it's going to be a free-for-all, I think, a feeding frenzy of corruption for the billionaire class and Trump allies who they have no regard for our democracy. They have no regard for the republic. They have no regard for the rule of law. And anything that sort of stands in their way right now, it seems like they're hell-bent on taking down those barriers so they can achieve, their vision for what America looks like. And it's dark times. I'm not going to lie. It's pretty dark times.
There is a kind of collective denial going on, isn't there? Because people are so busy working and living their lives, and what goes on in Washington, the federal government doesn't directly affect you unless you access federal services, or maybe you're paying your taxes, or there's a national disaster, an emergency. And, I fear that people won't really get a sense of quite how much deconstruction is going on until they really need them.
I get the sense right now that Americans have never felt more disillusioned and powerless in the face of what they feel like a full frontal attack coming from the Trump administration. I think, Americans turned out in droves to rebuke Trump after 2016. We had a strong, vital resistance throughout the entirety of the Trump presidency in his first term. We had a great midterm election in 2018, and we won back the White House in 2020. And then despite all of that, and despite everything that he said on the campaign trail, this man was reelected to office after January 6th, after all the corruption we've seen. And I think there's a sense out there among the public that, what good is there in fighting back? Why should I take to the streets? Why should I risk potential, political persecution, potential violence, threats and intimidation from right-wing outlets and the Proud Boys or whoever else it may be? I think I get this sense that the powerlessness has sort of stunned the voting public, and I think a lot of elected Democrats into silence at a moment where we absolutely need the exact opposite. If there was a time for resistance in this country, it's right now, because, in 2016, Trump was surrounded by a lot of sort of establishment figures, Republican figures, who they still pretended at least to care about things like the rule of law or constitutional democracy. He's eliminated all of those guardrails now, and his wildest impulses are fed and bolstered by these right-wing fanatics. They're not curtailed. And so I think there's a sense of disillusionment, there's a sense of powerlessness, but it's kind of a chicken and the egg situation, because you need the outrage signal to get the elected Democrats to do something. And the elected Democrats need to send that outrage signal back to the public so that they know that they should be out there in the streets demanding change or demanding a stop to some of these actions that they're taking. So it's a little bit frightening situation right now. I think we're still trying to kind of grapple with we're only in the first month of the Trump presidency right now. So I do think it's going to reassemble itself. I do think there's going to be some serious protests, some serious actions that show that people are not supportive of these things that are coming out of the Trump administration. But it's taking some time to rebuild, and that's, I think, where the threat is right now, because there's so much pain and destruction happening in this moment.
History tells us that protest is the solution, and to just kind of throw down your weapons and retreat is not the way that you overcome this situation. And I don't mean weapons physically, by the way, just in case anybody thinks that that's the case. But there have been major protests. The corporate media have not covered them. There was the No Kings Day last Monday, No Kings on President's Day. And people braved freezing temperatures, both at the Capitol and East Coast cities, trying to enter the Arizona State House to oppose a bill that would bolster federal immigration enforcement in Florida and California. There was hundreds of protesters doing Not My President's Day protests, and this No Kings theme was orchestrated by the 50-51 movement, and so there is some organizing going on, but you just wouldn't really know it if you were just sticking to the kind of regular news networks. They know that Trump is box office, and that once again there is money to be made.
It's been somewhat alarming to see the lack of coverage of the protest, of the backlash. Yeah. Not only in this country, but around the world, there's these protests going on. And I think the media has sort of, they've fallen victim to this Steve Bannon flood the zone strategy where, right, they're just pumping the media ecosystem full of news, on an every hour clip. And, I think it's taking reporters who have to write articles about every single one of these, executive orders that they're passing, or confirmations that they're, facilitating through the Senate, or whatever it may be. The media is both, has capacity issues. Journalists are being laid off left and right. They have journalistic programming concerns here. A lot of these networks are paying Trump millions in settlements right now as we speak, over bogus claims of defamation. And they're, I think, trying to assess the landscape. Where is the power and where is the energy in this country right now? I think, they're seeing somewhat meager protests compared to 2016, and they think, okay, well, this is not as newsworthy as, say, a mass deportation effort, or the confirmation of an insane person like Kash Patel to be the FBI director. So there's just all of this stuff happening. But I think the scary thing is that, authoritarian regimes win when they're able to silence the public, when they're able to stifle public outrage, either by coercion or intimidation or violence. And I do think that there's an element of that right now, that folks aren't taking to the streets in mass the same way that we saw last time around. Some of that pain that you talked about, I think, is going to help facilitate that. And I think that there's a lot of pain coming. I mean, just for example, this week we saw another major plane crash at a time when they're cutting hundreds of FAA workers. We saw, nuclear safety officials who were laid off at a time when Putin is bombing nuclear sites in Ukraine. You have these disease detectives over at the USDA, I think, who were working on bird flu at a time when bird flu is on the rise. And so, we're very much in the beginnings of, I think, some of that pain happening. And of course, that's not something I would welcome, but I do think the pain helps contribute to the outrage, and the outrage helps, facilitate more people showing up to those really, really, really important protests.
I guess part of the problem is that because Trump and Musk have no idea how the federal government works, and they've never really taken any interest in it, because they've never really needed to access anything, because the super rich have always been ring-fenced from anything, right? Especially healthcare, that they are coming in and they're being like, well, this doesn't make sense. I mean, they didn't even realize that USAID does international development. It's not just about foreign aid, but it's about developing these nations with the United States at the heart of that, to prevent the likes of China from coming in and having influence in those regions. And so gutting these things without really considering the effect on America. And I've heard them say, well, there's nothing to do with us. Nothing to do with us. Trump talks about that water between us and Ukraine and thinks that the water is a reason not to be supporting a sovereign nation. There is simply no thought or empathy or understanding of how government operates. Not just US government, but any government in any country, anywhere in the world. That it's a difficult place to start, isn't it? When the people in charge have just no concept of what it means to even be a federal worker, and how you put your politics to one side to come and do your job every day.
I think for a lot of people, it's really hard to tell whether some of the things that are happening are, due to incompetence and, negligence and the inability to just do the job, or whether it's something more nefarious, whether it's something more corrupt, whether it's something more, evil, that they are trying to set up government in a particular way. And I think this debate is somewhat silly, because I think it can be both. I think they're both.
Yeah, I agree with that.
They can be both incompetent people who don't realize that USAID serves an essential role in pushing back on China, which is one of their stated goals of the Trump administration, is to push back on China. They don't know that we have safety officials at the FAA and at the National Nuclear Security Administration who are doing these things that are protecting Americans every single day, that don't really get a ton of spotlight. But anybody who works in government knows that these people serve essential roles, and that a Democratic administration, if we were to come in and look at making cuts across the government, those things would be examined in a very serious, thoughtful way to say, okay, well, if these people were to, or we were to cut funding for this, what would happen to the health safety of people who are trying to protect themselves against bird flu or whatever it may be? They don't think about those things. It's that they don't care who they hurt or what they break in the process of dismantling federal government and society, so that they can rebuild it to benefit themselves and hand themselves massive tax breaks and deregulate the entire executive branch, so that Elon Musk can go on making billions and billions of dollars every year and take in billions of dollars in federal contracts. They just don't care who they hurt. And so they're doing all of these things with absolutely no regard for the pain that they're causing. And I think Elon Musk and Donald Trump's relationship together is perhaps the most frightening element of this, because I think Trump sees Musk as he can absorb a lot of the public opinion backlash or the bad press or the whatever it may be, because he's not a politician. He doesn't have to run for office. He's a billionaire. He's going to be a billionaire. Nothing's going to change. And Trump feels like he can skate by without necessarily taking all the heat for every one of these actions. Of course, it's his administration. He's the one signing off on all of this. He's the one overseeing all of this. But I think that once the calm of this early storm of all of these executive orders, of all of these actions that they're taking subsides, and we get to an actual governance environment where individual actions are examined by the public, and executive orders that pass that cause harm to Americans are actually covered by the media, by the mainstream media. And I think you will see the kind of backlash that we saw in 2016. It just does take time. And I think that they've found a unique strategy in both having Elon Musk and this flood the zone strategy to kind of distract the American people or overwhelm them into silence. And I think that's what's happening.
It's probably worth mentioning that there is an awful lot of people who think that Musk is amazing and that he really is the savior alongside Donald Trump, and that, the two of them are a force to be reckoned with. And, you see it in right-wing social media. They're saving us, and, they're at least they're doing something, and the government needed fixing and all this stuff. And the problem is there is some truth to that. And so, I think an issue previously was that the Democrats did not acknowledge that there was a great dissatisfaction with the way the federal government was bloated and was in need of investment. And that's the irony, isn't it? That, if they are going to overhaul any of these departments, it requires investment. And that's not something they wanted. So how are they going to do it without investing? I don't know. But anyway, back to the point. The point is that what do we do about the large numbers of people in the United States who voted for Trump, who have got Musk inadvertently, but actually think that this is the right recipe for America's future?
We were seeing the power of, propaganda at work. I mean, there's a reason that before his foray into the Trump world and his foray into politics and government, Elon Musk bought, Twitter and turned it into X and made it this cesspool of right-wing propaganda. It's control of the media, it's control of public opinion using these mega platforms. That sentiment that you're talking about of government waste, of course, that's existed forever. I mean, Ronald Reagan was a champion of that cause way back in the 80s. And so I think it's a sentiment that it's lingered underneath the surface for so long, and they've seen government, come up short on a lot of things, and they've seen stories about fraud and waste and abuse and all these things, and it's just lingered underneath the surface for so long. And then you have this person who is empowered by a president to go in and, go after fraud, waste, and abuse with whatever tools he wants, and without any repercussions or without any being held accountable by the law, any guardrails. And they cheer him on because they're like, yeah, he's going after this stuff. And then they have a propaganda outlet like Fox that is essentially just a promotion for all of this stuff. I mean, the other day when Trump and Musk sat down in an interview with Sean Hannity, he was scrolling on the screen all of these programs from USAID that they were slashing or claiming to have slashed. That stuff has been public for so long, and Democrats and Republicans, there's been a bipartisan coalition in Congress that have tried to cut down on that waste for a long time, and they've been unsuccessful. But not because they didn't have the will to do it; it's because they were constrained by the forces of a constitutional republic, and this administration does not seem constrained by those at all. I don't think that broadly the public is supportive of the way that they're doing it. I don't think that Elon Musk, his Doge is popular. And I think polling is bearing that out right now. We're seeing all these polls come out that are showing, that Elon Musk's approval rating is tanking. Not that necessarily matters all that much, but you're seeing polls show that the actions that he's taking are not supported. And you're starting to see Donald Trump's approval rating and his the way that voters look at his actions are coming down as well. And so if Elon Musk starts to be a drag on Donald Trump, that dynamic can change very quickly.
The Vice President, J.D. Vance, he said that judges should not have the authority to limit the executive's power, and said it's a direct attack on the foundation of the American legal system and the rule of law. This is where we cross over into the constitutional crisis, when Trump ignores judges' rulings. And additionally, Trump has claimed that he is above the law. He likened himself to a monarch or a king. And he posted, "He who saves his country does not violate any law." The Napoleon quote that was also used by Anders Breivik, the murderer in Norway. I mean, this is terrifying times when it's almost as if when the media says, Trump thinks he's a king, Trump reads that, because of course that's all he reads, is looking for his name in the papers, and then posts a picture of him with a crown on as a kind of two fingers up to the media and the people. it's very hard to kind of go for people when they have no shame, right? And they have no conscience, and they have no empathy. These people are monsters, effectively. I read this morning that reference to Trump as a supervillain. I hate to say that because I think he would really love that title, and then he'll put a picture of himself as Superman and call it supervillain. This is what we're dealing with. It's so childish. And,
it doesn't matter now in hindsight, but these were the things that we were all warning about ahead of the election. And, of course, it's on Democrats, the party itself and elected Democrats to have conveyed that message appropriately to the American people ahead of time. And, I don't necessarily think that we did. I think people lived through 4 years of Trump, and so they think of him as, and it was bad in many ways, terrible in many ways, but it wasn't catastrophic in that it didn't end our democracy. It didn't, it came pretty close on January 6th, but there wasn't this moment in which violence was needed to protect the republic from Trump or anything like that. And so,
we still got to vote in 2020, right? So that was that happened. That's probably not going to happen this time around.
And I think the public broadly just thinks that liberals and the media tend to, hyperbolize some of these things about Trump and what he is and what he stands for. But they don't even look at what's coming out of his mouth or what's coming on his Twitter screen. He's saying these things himself. It's not us saying them anymore. It's him. It's him saying that he wants to run for a third term. It's him saying, or J.D. Vance saying that judges can't control the legitimate power of the executive. It's him quoting Napoleon saying, he who saves his country does not violate any law. These are actions that he is taking himself, and the media is so overwhelmed that they're not able to contextualize these things for the American people. And there's a whole block of people out there, about 40-something% of the public, that just doesn't care. They just don't care. Yeah. So, in terms of constitutional crisis, we are absolutely nearing that moment. Trump has ignored elements of judges' orders already, of course, but we haven't seen some sort of directive from the Supreme Court or a high-level appellate court that he has violated yet. That will be the moment, I think, where a lot of folks in the media, especially, will finally say what we're dealing with, which is a constitutional crisis that we are very much on the breaking point of. We talked about at the outset, Democrats being in the political wilderness and being locked out of power and in the House, Senate, White House, and the courts. If he does, reach that constitutional crisis level, if he does decide to ignore an order from the Supreme Court, what are they going to do? I think we know that congressional Republicans aren't going to do a damn thing about it. And the courts don't have an army to stop Trump. It's going to take the public. It's going to take the public showing up in mass in the streets. It's going to take, people getting creative with how we protest and how we display that outrage, because I think that outrage matters. It really shows elected officials that they need to show some spine, Democrats in Congress especially. But I also think it signals to the broader world and to the broader country that, we're not happy with what's happening. We're all just not okay. It's not, I think a lot of people see what Musk is doing, see what Trump is doing, and they assume, oh, well, half the country supports what he's doing here. This is okay. At least he was elected, and this is what he was elected to do. And that's not the case. These people, even Trump supporters are not supporting what he's doing. There was a poll, I think, this morning that came out that showed 84%, I think, opposed his, pardoning of January 6th rioters. 86%. That's a broad coalition of people across, all ideologies who are rejecting some of the actions that he's taking. And so it's on us, I think, elected Democrats, to turn that outrage, to turn that opposition into, bodies in the street.
So let's talk about the numbers, because Trump claims that he has a mandate, and which he, by a whisker. This is the thing. Now that all of the numbers have been counted, he won the popular vote by 1.5 percentage points. The Electoral College, as we know, is rigged and stacked in favor of Republicans. There's been huge amounts of voter suppression over the last 4 or 5 years, well, for decades, but they ramped it up in swing states in the last 4 years because they knew that that was the best chance of winning the election, preventing people from actually voting or purging votes. And then, of course, there's the disinformation, which has played a huge part in Trump being elected. So whilst his election was legitimate on paper, there is so much debate to be had about how legitimate it is when you are allowed, courtesy of Citizens United, to have someone like Elon Musk spend $270-odd million on helping him win the election. The reason I'm saying this is not because I'm an election denier, but because it seems to me that there are more people who didn't vote for Donald Trump than who did.
Oh, yeah.
And that's what's important going forward, right? If you consider that, he got 77 million, Harris got 75 million or whatever, then you have like another 60 million who either didn't vote or whose votes weren't counted. I mean, there are more people who didn't vote for Trump than those who did. How do the Democrats harness that movement?
It's one of my biggest pet peeves in political discourse is, the constant refrain of, half the country voted for this. Half the country did not vote for this. Half the voting population did not vote for this. I mean, he did not get 50% of the vote. He did not get 50% of the popular vote. But not only that, there's a huge population of Americans who did not vote, who were eligible to vote and did not vote. And then on top of all of that, digging into the data, this mandate, he may have been elected, fairly, and we can debate fairly because there's plenty of unfairness that went into that election, but they didn't support the individual policies or the approaches that he's taking right now. I mean, First of all, he did not campaign on cutting veteran care. He did not campaign on slashing critical spending on working class families, on slashing Medicaid spending, which they've just proposed in the new Republican budget of almost $1 trillion in cuts. Medicaid serves predominantly Republican voters more than it does Democratic voters in red states. There's a reason why populists like Steve Bannon are championing those things, because it would be crazy for the Republican Party to go after their own voters and strip them, millions of their own voters, of their health care. Trump did not campaign on these things. He did not campaign on a rogue billionaire staging a hostile takeover of every federal agency, of dismantling the Department of Education and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which is extremely popular, in its fight against junk fees and going after big corporations who are price gouging us. These things, this has been a constant problem for the Democratic Party, is that the individual policies that we support, the vision that we are campaigning on is extremely popular with the voting public. Vast majorities of Democrats, independents, and Republican voters support our agenda over their agenda, and yet, Donald Trump can still be elected. It's a real problem, I think, for the Democratic Party, and I think it's a messaging problem, it's a branding problem, it's a strategy problem, it's a media problem, a media ecosystem problem, and Trump he's the perfect politician to kind of fit right through that, those gaps of public knowledge, and this, I cannot stand this he has a mandate framework, because this man won by a few 10,000 votes in a couple swing states, did not get 50% of the vote. It was not a mandate. It was not a sweeping election. Yes, he won, all the battleground states, but that's the way the country moved. When the country moves in one direction, the swing states tend to move in one direction. It doesn't necessarily mean that he has broad support for, attacking our institutions, attacking investments in working families, attacking federal employees. That's not what he was elected to do.
But Republicans know that because they got a clean sweep in that election, and that their tactics of disinformation and voter suppression worked, unlike their last coup with Mike Pence and the fake electors scheme, which failed, that they know that they're onto something now. And it's so much so that they've reintroduced the SAVE Act, that would require all citizens to produce a document like a passport or a birth certificate each time they register to vote, even when they re-register if they move. And it's this kind of unprecedented national requirement has the potential to block millions of eligible Americans from casting ballots, most likely for Democrats. And so my fear is that they've managed to work out how to play the system so that a Democrat can never win another election going forward. That in itself is so acutely dangerous, considering their agenda and the isolationist plans for America and the racism and the misogyny and the xenophobia and everything that's baked into that this period, this deconstruction period, is going to last a whole lot longer than it needs to.
The reverberations, I think, of the actions that they're taking right now will last decades, if not centuries. I think the nightmare scenario is exactly what you're talking about, is them coming into power and using that power to increase their own power and diminish our power, diminish the power of the minority, and to increase the power of the majority. And I think, you're seeing this already. Elon Musk spent however many hundreds of millions of dollars to elect Trump. I think it was $277 million to elect Trump. He's already set his sights on the next few races that he can use, spend his millions and billions to control our democracy. There's a big Wisconsin Supreme Court race on April 1st. And Elon Musk just dropped $2.5 million into that race so that Republicans could take that seat and take control of the Wisconsin Supreme Court. In 2020, that court blocked Trump's attempt to overturn the election by just one vote. And so now they're trying to ensure that that does not happen again, that they have someone in there who's going to do their bidding, who's going to rig future elections for them, who's going to carry out their MAGA agenda to ban abortion and go after voting rights and go after, the ability for people to cast a ballot fairly. This is exactly the fear I think a lot of Democrats had in them taking over, is that they're going to use the majority power to curtail us even more, and prevent, I think, fair elections moving forward. I don't want to necessarily say that our elections won't be fair moving forward, but I think if they're successful in some of the efforts that they're going to be taking, or at least trying to take, that's very much a possibility, and that's frightening. And I think it should be alarming to Americans. It should be more alarming than it is. But I think that's a problem of Democrats, and it's a problem of the media. So we have to start telling those stories right now.
Because it's not illegal what they've done. This is what's so clever about the purging of votes, in various districts, is that it's done in such a stealth-like way. And I was encouraging people to kind of search for, to go online and to try and see where any of these new voting policies showed up. And they're all months ago, like way before the election. So by suppressing the vote much earlier than the election, in different places at different times, it doesn't really kind of connect and show up as one major event that people need to be like, oh my God, look what they're doing. Because it's been done very subtly and very cleverly and legally. And that is why they're like supervillains, because they're able to kind of play that game. And just in response to what you were saying about Musk and his spending, he's going to throw $10 million at Nigel Farage and the far-right Reform Party in the UK and try and get him elected there. And he's currently doing it in Germany with the AfD. And as we know, he's been hosting the leader of the far-right kind of Nazi sympathizing party there. I mean, so much so that their approval rating has gone down because Musk has attached himself to their party. It's almost like it's too much Nazi for Germany, which is, I mean, it's great, but it's like, it's just so weird we're even having to have these conversations.
I think the extent to which, Elon Musk has been radicalized and red-pilled by his own platform, the platform that he ended up buying, has been underreported.
Yes, he's addicted to it, isn't he?
He's addicted to it, but this man, he is a Nazi. I mean, he is a white supremacist. He does want authoritarian rule in this country and around the world. He is about as dangerous of a human being as you can imagine in proximity to the president of the United States. And not only that, to be the wealthiest man in the world, to have those massive government contracts, to have the ability to control satellites in space that can monitor Americans, or the ability to, shut down a media platform that people use to communicate around the globe. These are authoritarian actions. He is an authoritarian. Trump is an authoritarian. And I think the bromance between these two is about as lethal as it comes, because Musk is not accountable. He's not an elected official. He's not a politician. He doesn't need to speak like one. He doesn't need to act like one. He doesn't even necessarily care that he's getting the backlash that he's getting from the media or from the public, because it only digs him in, entrenches him even further into those right-wing views, in those far-right views. I think the only way, to curtail that is really for Democrats and the public to really start examining how he gets his power. I think we should start by, considering taking ourselves off of X. I think we should consider, selling Teslas, not renting Teslas, not getting in Ubers that are driven by, that have Teslas. We need to start thinking about how we can diminish his power, either economically, politically, whatever it may be, because, the further entrenched I think he gets within this White House and within this federal government, the more damage he can do and the more he can carry out that, neo-Nazi vision for the world that he's carrying out, here and in Germany and in France and all over the place. So it's really scary. And I think that the public, needs to kind of be driven by the shoulders and shaken, because it's just, it's kind of flying under the radar right now. And they see him as this person who is this wealthy, billionaire, eccentric tech guy who's come in and built all these great companies. But, that's a story of Silicon Valley. That's a story of the mainstream media. That's not the true story of what's happening here. And that's not the true story of how he got his wealth and power in the first place. Right. So,
Well, he bought these companies. I mean, he didn't create these companies. And I suppose that's the other deceptive part of this, is that he is embodying this personality and creating this character, but it's a bait and switch. I mean, it's pure deception, and Doge is a deceptive organization, or it's not even a government department, is it? I mean, it's just a thing that he isn't even officially allowed to be in charge of. So there is so much deception, even in the name of this organization and his involvement in it. And I think once people, as you say, start to realize that it's a cover for deconstructing the administrative state, but also so many of the things that he claims to have found, the corruption he's found, it's a lot of it is just based in racism or misogyny. I mean, it's all diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, things that he is just politically opposed to. So that's why they're getting shut down, and they're calling them corruption, but they're not. They're just things that are supposed to make the world and America fairer and more inclusive.
And I don't even think he actually is philosophically, I mean, maybe he's philosophically opposed to diversity, equity, and inclusion, but it's a cover for a broader strategy of going after the federal government, for going after the federal employees, for going after the spending, for going after the people that they serve, and for enriching his the corporate allies and his billionaire friends who are trying to get some of this funding. I mean, he has been tasked with going after fraud in the federal government. He is the biggest fraudster in the federal government. I mean, this is a man who has not built any of the companies that made him successful. He bought them, as you said. He's an immigrant who came to this country, who benefited from billions of dollars in federal government contract investment in him as an individual, investment in companies that have done some great work, they are tech companies, but you see it in his insecurity about how he loves to present. The other day in that interview with Sean Hannity, he's wearing a shirt that says tech support, and it's just funny because he's not a tech guy, and people in tech laugh at him because they think he's a clown. He doesn't know what he's doing when it comes to tech.
Well, it's the same as Trump. I mean, they tell us that they're geniuses.
Right. Have you seen, there's a story about him paying consultants essentially to make him look good at video games because he wants to be good in the gamer community. He wants to be considered a gamer. It's just so pathetic. I mean, he creates fake accounts on X that say he's a great dad and posts pictures of him and his kids, and they're run by him. And it's so pathetic. And I think the story of Elon Musk, is a false story, of course, but it's starting to come apart at the seams, and I think the public is quickly realizing it, and that's why you're seeing these polls that show not only his favorability falling, but Americans expressing alarm at what he's doing to the federal government and its services.
We have to take a quick break, but I want to come back and talk about the Democrats and their strategy for taking this on, and who might be best placed to lead the charge. We'll do that next here on The Weekend Show. Let's be real, 2025's been all about change, whether it's work, personal stuff, or just the daily grind. It can be hard to keep up, but here's the deal. When things get hectic, we don't have to go through it alone. Embrace the power of nature and elevate your everyday with Via. Trusted by over 500,000 happy customers, Via is the Swiss Army knife of wellness, dedicated to harnessing the natural benefits of hemp to create high-quality wellness products. Whether you're looking to improve your sleep, focus, or recovery, Via has something for you. Via is well-renowned for their highest quality hemp, sourced from trusted, independently owned American farms. And the best part, Via legally ships to nearly all states in the US in discreet packaging directly to your door with a worry-free guarantee, no medical card required. So, if you're 21 plus, check out our link to Via's website in our description and use code WEEKEND for 15% off. And if you're new to Via, get a free gift of your choice. That's 15% off with the code WEEKEND. So, it's a new year, 2025, and you're thinking, how am I going to make this year different? Am I going to build something for myself? I'm dying to be my own boss, or see if I can turn this business idea I've been kicking around into a reality. But I just don't know how to make it happen. Shopify is how you're going to make it happen, and let me tell you how. The best time to start your new business is right now, and Shopify makes it simple to create your brand, open for business, and get your first sale. Get your store up and running easily with thousands of customizable templates, no coding or design skills required. All you need to do is drag and drop. Their powerful social media tools let you connect all of your channels and create shoppable posts to help you sell everywhere that people scroll. Shopify makes it easy to manage your growing business. They help with the details like shipping, taxes, and payments from one single dashboard, allowing you to focus on the important stuff like growing your business. With Shopify, your first sale is closer than you think. Established in 2025 has a nice ring to it, doesn't it? Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/weekend, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/weekend to start selling with Shopify today. That's shopify.com/weekend. We're back on The Weekend Show. I'm Anthony Davis, and Sawyer Hacket joins us. Sawyer, we need people like you who are cutting through on social media, who are pushing the message that Democrats are opposing what is coming out of the Trump regime. And we were talking earlier about people going out and protesting. I would argue that social media is a modern form of protest. Arguably, you reach more people. It's a little bit like a campaign sending out door knockers versus reaching people through Facebook, for example. I mean, it does have a broad reach, and millions of people will be watching our videos because they care and because they connect and they want to know that there are people out there who think like them. Do you feel that the Democrats have learnt their lesson from the loss of the election with Kamala Harris as the candidate, and how have they adjusted their strategy going forward?
I think we're still in the process of learning those lessons. I think there was many lessons to learn, and I think those lessons, some of them stem from the Harris campaign. I think more of them stem from the Biden campaign that preceded it. I think the Democratic Party has to come to terms with the fact that we have lost support of working class voters. And that did not happen, in the very short period of time that Kamala Harris became our nominee and ran for president. It almost proceeded all the way back, before President Obama. So I think, in learning some of those lessons, I think the Democrats have kind of looked at two different approaches. It's, do we kind of appease the right-wing talking points and, don't talk about transgender issues and stay away from DEI and, kind of stay away from these cultural issues that are really dividing, especially white working class voters? Or do we embrace a more populist message? Do we embrace, an economic vision that's completely centered around working class voters? Do we distance ourselves from corporate money and billionaire money and instead take on those people as the correct villains of our society? Especially right now, as we're seeing somebody like Elon Musk and the 13 billionaires that are in the Trump cabinet right now. To me, the latter approach of harnessing a populist working class message is the one that has more appeal. I think just as important as that message, though, we need some messengers. I think the Democratic Party actually, contrary to a lot of the commentary out there, we have a deep bench of really talented people. And I think you're seeing some of those people start to step up in this moment. I think you're seeing folks like Senator Chris Murphy from Connecticut, who is really harnessing that populist language and calling out the corruption, calling out the billionaire class kind of taking over America, the fabric of our country. You're seeing folks like Greg Casar, who is the new chair of the Progressive Caucus, who's really leading Democrats with that kind of outraged message and fighting back. There's a lot of really talented Democrats out there. And I think one silver lining of this weird moment we're in as a party is that it gives the opportunity for new leaders to kind of emerge from the political wilderness and show themselves. And I think, we have a couple messengers at the top of our party who are in their senior years, folks like Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi, who I think folks are ready for a change. We're ready for some fresh blood, some fresh faces. I think Hakeem Jeffries is going to be a good leader. I think he's, still not the same kind of messenger approach I would want of, being aggressive as possible and going after some of these things. But I think, some of those lessons need to be learned really quickly because I think right now there's a sense out there that voters aren't seeing Democrats step up to the plate. They're not seeing Democrats sound the alarm about all these things happening. Part of the reason why I recently launched into the video content side of things on TikTok and Instagram and YouTube was because I wasn't frankly seeing it to the degree that I would have wanted. And I think the public can be cowed into silence when they don't feel like their elected leaders are channeling the outrage that they're seeing when they watch the news. And I think it's just time for more people to step up and just find creative ways to speak out because right now it just feels like there's a void of leadership in the face of a whole bunch of awful happening.
Do you think that the Democrats know that Hakeem Jeffries is not up to standard, that he's a great strategist, that he is, great at messaging, but he isn't necessarily the superstar to counteract the supervillain? I mean, is that conversation being had?
I mean, I think, Hakeem Jeffries spent a lot of time underneath the wing of Nancy Pelosi, learning a lot of party strategy, legislative strategy. I mean, you say what you will about Nancy Pelosi, and I've said plenty, but she is a master of legislative power. She understands the dynamics of Congress. She understands the parliamentary rules. She understands how to control her caucus and keep them united when they need to be united. To me, that's the most important thing that Hakeem Jeffries needs to do in this moment is the ability to keep the caucus united. Schumer, too, because especially when we have like these big budget fights that are coming up. March 14th, the government runs out of money and Republicans need to pass a spending bill. They haven't passed a spending bill without Democrat help in a decade, I think it's been. And so they're going to have to come to us. And are we going to be able to keep our entire caucus in both chambers united in saying, no, you're not getting a single vote from us for any budget until you put guardrails on Elon Musk, until you restore funding that was, frozen by this administration, until you rehire those federal employees who are not under the purview of the executive, until you do some of these things that I think people are expecting of Democrats. We have leverage, very limited leverage, but this is one of them. So step up and do it. Step up and use that leverage to fix some of the problems. If voters feel like, they're pushing you to do something and you step up or you fail to step up and use your power to benefit them, then they're going to be even more disillusioned and feel even more powerless. And why would they show up in the streets to protest? And why would they, show up in the midterms to vote when the last time that they put you in power, you didn't deliver for them the way that you campaigned on? So I really do think that it's a matter of like perspective for folks like Jeffries and Schumer, that this is not business as usual. Like we're in a knife fight to the death right now, and like it's time to start thinking about it that way, because talking about the institutions and what Congress is supposed to do and how we're supposed to act and comport yourself, nobody cares anymore. That's out the window. Time to start fighting.
Well, Trump certainly doesn't care. I mean, my worry is that with presidential immunity that he's been granted by the Supreme Court, he's just going to say, well, I don't need you to pass a budget resolution, and I'm just going to do it anyway. I mean, this is the fear that the actual structure and the construct of Congress, Trump doesn't care for. They're kind of anarchists, but, they're also billionaires. So there is some conflict there. But leadership what I'm seeing, the people like AOC who are actually saying explicitly what needs to be said, because I feel personally that Jeffries is very good at dancing around the subject, and he does a great dance, and I love the way he talks, and I think that he's really smart. But there is a certain acuteness of delivery that you're getting from some of these other Democrats who maybe don't have the authority that they would really enjoy if they were allowed to step up. I'd love to see Jasmine Crockett being on the front line. How do we get those people to kind of, to get fast-tracked into senior leadership in the Democratic Party?
I think one of the biggest mistakes that the Democratic caucus made over the last year was, not putting AOC in charge of that oversight committee when she put her name out there to run for it, and instead decided to pick, Jerry Connolly, who is a great man, a good Democrat from my home state of Virginia, but, is in his late 70s and suffering from some medical conditions, and definitely not the voice of outrage and opposition that you need in a moment where you're fighting autocracy. I think I'm not necessarily optimistic that Democrats are going to be able to fast track any of those people into major leadership positions. I think some of them are going to have to get creative about stepping up and just being those voices on their own volition. I mean, I think, I think they can be launching some of their own media channels themselves. I mean, Ted Cruz has a podcast that he's been making millions off and sending into his campaign accounts. Why aren't Democrats creating some podcasts? Why aren't Democrats, holding daily press conferences and protests outside of the White House or out front of the IRS or the Treasury Department or the Department of Education? Democrats are going to have to get creative here and step up in unique ways. And I think every single person has their own platform, their own ability to reach the American people. AOC is an expert at channeling both the message and finding, the platforms to get to different audiences. I think all Democrats need to do that. And I think the ones who are not stepping up, who are kind of sitting back and, spending time in their districts, at home and not fighting back, are the ones that we're going to face some harsh realities next time we have primary seasons coming up. At the same time, we are somewhat powerless in this moment. I mean, we don't have a lot of authority. We don't have a lot of power. And like what you said, Trump is going to ignore the law in a lot of respects, and he could just ignore the Supreme Court. What power do we have to fight back? To me, we have two arenas of power, and that's public opinion and it's the markets, and both of which they are pretty allegiant to. I mean, you saw in the first administration, Trump's lowest moments were, family separation and trying to dismantle Obamacare. In moments where the public is genuinely upset at something that the president is doing, he has backed down. He's backed down in the face of public opinion. We're going to have to really bolster that this time around. And then secondly, in the markets, they are responsive. These people's wealth are controlled by the movement of the Dow every single day. And so when you see tariffs tariff announcements that tank the markets the next morning, Trump backs down on those tariffs immediately. And so there's ways that we can step up here. There's ways that we can still fight back, legislative, judicial, and public opinion wise, that I think people are looking for. We're just going to have to get a lot more creative.
And bringing the receipts, because the thing is that pretty much everything that Trump says and that Musk says are untrue. They're just not based in fact. And so we have enough evidence, through video and the tech that we all have access to actually call them out. And so it should be kind of easy, to me anyway, to, you're never short of material to work with. And Trump is so disinterested. He just didn't want to get prosecuted and go to prison, right? So he got over the line. I mean, he only won by that much. He only needed that much of a nudge to get over the line to safety. I think that's how he sees it. And so that's why he's playing golf all the time, because he just doesn't really care anymore. And he's subcontracted his efforts to all of these neo-Nazis and these tech people who are just doing what they want. And he's almost like, just don't bother me with your problems. I'm on the golf course. That, after a while, is going to take its toll. I mean, he keeps posting, or people keep posting video of him in his golf cart. He's on vacation. And that, is going to matter at some point, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the man golfed every other day of his administration the first time around. He collected hundreds of millions of dollars from foreign leaders coming to stay at his resorts. Yeah. And he would host these golf. I mean, as we speak right now, I just did a video on this a couple days ago, and this is just an aside real quick. I think every Democrat should be finding some of these unique things, because like you said, there's just so much out there, and they're flooding the zone, but we can be flooding the zone with our explainer videos, our contrast videos, show the different things that are going on.
Cover it all. You don't have to just pick, just say, we just need to focus in this area. No, focus on all of it.
The New York Times reported the other day that Donald Trump in the Oval Office was brokering a merger between the PGA Tour and Live Golf, which is a Saudi-backed golf league that is controlled by the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund. This murderous regime that killed Jamal Khashoggi back in the day. These people they do not share our values. He's in that office negotiating a merger between a Saudi-backed company that his family is a business partner of. They are hosting a golf tournament at Trump's resort in Doral in April, I believe it is. And he's brokering a merger between these two companies because it's going to benefit his family's company to the tune of tens of millions of dollars. There's no reason that Democrats should not be talking about this on TV. It's blatant corruption. The American people do not support those things. I think corruption and the handouts to the billionaires is where we should be setting our target. We should be every bit of public messaging that we do should be tied back to that. Of course, we are going to have to sometimes defend somewhat unpopular or I hesitate to use unpopular, because USAID's work is not unpopular in itself. USAID, foreign aid, the concept of foreign aid may not poll that well, but the work that USAID does is extremely popular. Or immigrants, in this country who do a tremendous, who are the backbone of our economy, who if all undocumented immigrants were deported out of this country tomorrow, we would fall apart instantly. Of course, there's going to be certain fights that we decide not to take right off the bat. But, I think when we have content, when we have news in front of us that's showing us the corruption, that's showing us the handouts to the billionaire class and the, enriching of Elon Musk and all his little minions, we have to tell those stories, because the public's not going to hear them on their own, because it's oversaturated with all this news. So it's on us to tell those stories. I think one way that the congressional Democrats can do that is pick a day, you pick a really telegenic member of Congress, and you're in charge of responding to everything he does that day. You put out the video, everyone's promoting it, every single person in the caucus is promoting it. It goes to every press outlet, you're on TV, you're on all the nightly shows. Start designating people to fight these fights, because you can only they know the attention economy better than we do. That is 100% the case. Democrats need to start zeroing the public's attention on the things that we want the attention to be on, and that should be corruption, and that should be the enriching of the billionaire class at the expense of working people. It's an easy message. We just have to get everyone united behind it.
Trump said he's considering a plan to pay out $5,000 stimulus checks to taxpayers in the form of a Doge dividend. He said it during a speech on Wednesday and explained it as part of taking 20% of the savings identified by Elon Musk at Doge and giving it back to American taxpayers. I mean, this all sounds very familiar, like the bribery with the stimulus checks during COVID, where people had to wait because they needed to print them with Trump's signature on, and then he took ownership of that. And even Biden said that he regretted not putting his signature on the checks when he sent them out. I mean, this is all marketing. It is a bribe. It's a rebate on tax already paid. It's not even new money. They aren't identifying any waste and fraud at Doge. That is a scam. So really, this could cost billions, sending out another bribery check to people in the hope that it keeps them quiet for a few years whilst they are being robbed in another department.
Yeah, the back of the envelope math here is just it's hilarious to think about, because they say they're going to send to every tax-paying family, 79 million families in America who pay income tax, $5,000, $5,000 checks, rebates, whatever they want to call them, as part of a 20% allocation of the savings that they saved through Doge.
Yeah.
That amount, if you calculate it out, is about $395 billion. If you take it down to that 20%, they would need to save $1.9 trillion from the federal government to make those payments. It's laughable. I mean, that's more than the entire discretionary budget for the federal government, more than education spending, defense spending, transportation spending. They claim that they've saved $55 billion, but that number is absolutely ridiculous. Included in that was one $8 billion contract for ICE that turned out to be an $8 million contract for ICE. Yeah. And what about inflation? I mean, this was a party that blasted us, spent a year blasting us because the Inflation Reduction Act was, spending on behalf of the American people and investments in clean energy and transportation and all these things. They say that that's what caused inflation in this country. How does giving $5,000 to every family in the United States, how is that going to affect inflation at a time that it's rising right now very, very rapidly, at a time when they're pushing out tariffs that are absolutely going to exacerbate inflation, at a time when they're carrying out this mass deportation agenda that is absolutely going to make inflation worse? This is a farce. They're not going to send checks to anybody. You're not getting any money. Don't get your hopes up. Don't start spending your money because you think this check is coming, because it's not coming for you. The only people who are getting checks are Elon Musk, Donald Trump, and the rest of the billionaires who are going to collect $4.5 trillion in tax breaks for billionaires and big corporations. They've already put it in writing. They already passed a blueprint of this legislation yesterday. They're moving full speed ahead on this, and that's what this Doge thing is all about. It's creating this farce that they're going after spending, that they're cutting trillions of dollars in fraud, waste, and abuse, as if there's trillions of dollars of fraud, waste, and abuse in the government, because it's a precursor to giving tax cuts, not to you, but to billionaires and to the big corporations. That's what this whole thing is about. It's about deregulation and tax cut for billionaires. End of story. There's no rebates coming.
And if there was any fraud found by Doge, it should have been referred now to the Justice Department for investigation. But there have been no referrals because they have found no fraud, like I said earlier. All they found is stuff that they politically don't like the sound of, like sending money to black Africans. And we know what Elon Musk thinks about black Africans. We know his family history and his story. And so much of this seems to go back to racism and the kind of Nazification of the Republican Party, which you could argue never left the Confederacy, the Klan. I mean, all of the history. And yet we're starting to see it be presented in a much more explicit fashion, whether it be the criticism and the kind of demoralizing language towards people of color or trans people or LGBTQ plus or people with disabilities. Then, of course, Elon Musk supporting the AfD in Germany, but doing the Hitler salute at an inauguration event for Donald Trump. And then just this week, we've seen Steve Bannon get up at the CPAC conference and, make the case that if we stop now, then that's their only chance. If we keep going now, the Democrats will never get in power. He kind of closed up his speech and then he threw his hand into the air with a Nazi salute. I mean, at what point are people going to join the dots and realize that there is a common theme with an awful lot of these white supremacists, and that is their support of the Nazification of America?
Yeah, Steve Bannon and Elon Musk have been at each other's throats since Elon came into the picture. Yeah. I think Bannon even called him a parasitic illegal immigrant at one point and a fraud. Right. But they're really two peas in a pod. I mean, they both have no problem completely debasing themselves and throwing up Nazi salutes in front of thousands of people, and they know exactly what they're doing. They're doing it for the reaction. They're doing it for the outrage. They're doing it for the distraction, and at the same time, they're sending signals to the darkest corners of America that you are empowered in this administration, in this society that we're building. You are not diminished. You have a voice and you have power, and you shouldn't be afraid to use force, and you shouldn't be afraid to say these vile racist things, these horrible Nazi things, because you have an ally in us, in the White House, in the Republican Party's Donald Trump's chief strategist and the wealthiest man in the world have your backing. They're throwing up Nazi salutes at major rallies. And that doesn't mean that, just because it's a distraction, just because they're doing it on purpose, does not mean that Democrats shouldn't talk about it. We can't let it distract us from what they're trying to do. This is, of course, Elon Musk did this right at the beginning of the outset of the administration as they're preparing to send him into all these agencies, and it was a distraction. We talked about it for a couple of days, but it still matters, and I think the public is still revolted by that. They find it absolutely disgusting. Yeah. They do not support it, and so I don't think that we should ignore it. I mean, you just saw it at CPAC a few days ago. There was a leader in France, a far right leader in France, who canceled his remarks at CPAC after he saw Steve Bannon do that Nazi salute. This is a far-right leader in France saying,
that's right. I don't want anything to do.
Jordan Bardella, yeah, exactly. I don't want anything to do with these guys. These guys are crazy. And you mentioned the same thing earlier. It's happening all over the place, that they want nothing to do with Elon Musk because they think of him as toxic, and they think of him as, a far-right Nazi sympathizer, if not a Nazi himself. And so, that's why I said earlier, I think Democrats can't avoid some of these fights, just because they're racially oriented or they're going after certain populations of people who, the public has mixed ambivalent feelings about, like undocumented immigrants. We have to fight every fight, because every inch of ground that we cede them is an inch that they're going to take, and it's an inch that's going to cause tremendous harm to a lot of people, marginalized people, people of color who they have fixed their ire on. We have to be that coalition that can both fight them on those issues, but also call out the corruption, call out the extremism. We have to be able to do both.
And say it out loud. I mean, I was thinking back to, I was watching a video of Eric Trump from like 10 years ago doing a kind of white power symbol with his hand, and Lara Trump kind of bats him away. And then Donald Trump Jr. making a speech and doing white power symbols until he then forgot to do it, so kind of stopped doing it after the first couple of minutes of the speech, because it was clearly intentional at the top when he still was smart enough to remember that he wanted to do it. I mean, these calls to action, the Proud Boys, stand back and stand by, good people on both sides. I mean, how many times do they have to kind of let slip their true intentions? I mean, Trump again this week has been talking about eugenics. Musk has been talking about eugenics. They do believe in this white superior race. And America doesn't look like that anymore. And as much as they would love to go back to that, it's too late. And so, the only way that they're going to achieve that white supremacy is either by shutting people out or ethnically cleansing, as Trump wants to do in Gaza. I mean, the where this is headed is very, very worrying. And I think it's been proven more than ever with Trump's take on Ukraine, where he has repositioned America to support Russia. And now the European allies are going to have to form their own coalition, not to fight just Putin, but to fight America as well. Now, considering that 80 million people died in the Second World War, and come the end of it, we knew who was on whose side. For Trump to change all of that, considering all the veterans and all of the people who gave their lives for peace in Europe, all undone by one orange insecure man.
I don't think Americans have quite come to grips with the significance of what happened this week. I mean, America switched sides in a major conflict between an autocracy, a dictator, a murderous dictator, and a democracy in Ukraine that we have helped bolster in this fight for so long. We've had a bipartisan coalition that has supported them and invested in them, not only in this country but across the world. We are now part of the Axis powers in a fight between good and evil. And I don't think that the media is explaining that to the public in a compelling way. I don't think that they're putting this in the correct context that it is. I mean, you have Donald Trump essentially switching sides in this war. You have him calling Vladimir Zelensky a dictator and saying that he started this conflict between Ukraine and Russia. I mean, that is a Vladimir Putin talking point. That's their message. That's their propaganda. And at the same time, you have Vladimir Putin saying, "I'm not going to meet with Trump until Trump has satisfied my wishes for him to be tougher on Europe." So we have not only have we abandoned Ukraine, we've abandoned Europe, we've abandoned all of our allies who have invested in democracy in Ukraine, and you have this is the Republican Party. This is the party of Reagan and leaders who fought Russia, John McCain, who were such hawks against this man and this administration in Russia. And all of that just completely turned on its head the second Donald Trump won this election. You have Republicans in Congress right now who are just stunned in silence. They won't say a damn thing about it. Where the hell is Lindsey Graham right now? It's such a dark moment for the world, and I think Democrats would be wise to do some outreach to our allies in Europe to reassure them that the majorities in this country, the vast majorities in this country, are on the side of Ukraine, that we want to see democracy prevail, not autocracy prevail, and that just because we have this authoritarian leader in this country who wants to be like Vladimir Putin does not mean that he has achieved that same level of control over his population the way that Vladimir Putin has. We oppose all of this, and we need to make sure that that's very clear both to the American public and around the world, because our allies cannot afford to stand down from this fight, even though we are, which is extremely depressing.
It's being confident to tell it like it is. The Nazification of the MAGA Republican Party, there is enough evidence of that now. And I would say that Trump switching sides, as you describe it, is really is the icing on the cake. And if you can't see that now, then you are purposely choosing to not look up. And that's really very worrying, because this new world order that the tech broligarchs are planning, It's all written in Project 2025. We had warning about this. We knew that this was their plan. They are seeing it through. Trump is too lazy to kind of really get into the weeds of it. He's always wrong about everything. He doesn't bring any detail, doesn't read anything. And so all of these announcements that we've heard from Trump on this subject, including from J.D. Vance at that frightening speech that he made in Munich, and then that speech that Pete Hegseth gave at the NATO summit, all of the language was Putin talking points, had come straight out of the Kremlin's press office. And then Trump just repeated it.
It's extremely depressing. I mean, I think you look at what's happening, this week with, you have the president's administration, negotiators from the White House who are in Saudi Arabia, negotiating a peace deal with Russians. Yeah. And there's no Ukrainians there to negotiate this deal. I mean
why are the Saudis there? I mean, probably because he wants to talk about the Gulf thing as well.
You have one murderous regime hosting, a wannabe autocracy and an autocracy to negotiate a peace about a democracy. It's astounding. And I think what you said about Trump, Trump is not well read enough to understand these ideologies or understand the power structures that lead to authoritarianism. Elon Musk, I don't think is well read enough either, but I think he's red-pilled enough that he's spent time in these circles and knows the theory here. They know the logic. They know the steps that you take. They're trying to present this as if this is the will of the people, as if this is democracy in action. This is the democratization of Nazification. Like they think that by presenting this as the will of the people, they can kind of facilitate a movement into authoritarianism. And I just don't think the public buys it. The public is not, they do not see Nazi salutes from Steve Bannon and Elon Musk and think, oh, interesting. There's a contingent of the American public who supports this. Like, we know who Nazis are. Like, that is an essential part of our education and socialization as Americans. The more that these people are put out into the limelight, the more that they're exposed as the Nazis that they are. I think the more you'll see both protests start to pick back up, you'll see polling really start to tank, you'll see the markets start to tank. Donald Trump, I think, had an opportunity here in winning this election to really cement himself as this leader and rise off of these BS media narratives about what his election meant and all these things. And instead, he's empowered some of the biggest Looney Tune Nazis in far-right politics to carry out this weird ideology as part of his administration. He's just a vessel. He's a vessel for them to achieve their purposes. And I don't think that he's ever going to be the spokesman of it. He just wants to be the one in charge, the one that gets the credit, the one that's...
Yeah, he's been used, hasn't he? He was useful. Yeah. And now they've got in, and it's all of them, from Stephen Miller and Russell Vogt. You start to scrutinize these people's views as individuals, and the white supremacy and the racism is at the heart of every decision that they make. And to see America roll itself back into that, for me, the saddest thing is that maybe it was always there and it was just suppressed and that it never really went away. And now, they've been given the opportunity to rise again.
I mean, the Republican Party has used, race and religion and other kind of identifiers, cultural identifiers as wedge issues for decades and decades and decades. I mean, this goes back way before even the 80s. You have a Republican Party that has attempted to use race to break up class. They have they've broken up the working class by breaking off white voters from the rest of the working class and pumping them full of propaganda about race, about DEI, about critical race theory, about transgenderism, about whatever it may be. These are all tools from an authoritarian mindset that allow them to break up the opposition. That's what this is about. They're trying to divide us using race, using religion. Of course it's racist. Of course it's anti-Semitic. Of course it's all of those things. But it's also a useful tactic. Trump knows the tactic. He gets the tactic. He gets driving a wedge between your opposition. What I don't think he understands is that the offshoots of that ideology are the Stephen Millers, are the Steve Bannons, who they want higher purposes than just dividing the opposition. They want to demolish the opposition. They want to suppress the opposition to be nothing. And they want to, facilitate this authoritarian vision for this country. That's not the same thing as winning elections using race, which is what the Republican Party has been doing for years. So yes, of course, it's been going on in the background forever. They've just found the next step in the process, and they've empowered the darkest voices to carry it out.
With no adults in the room, with no guardrails, legal or political, with no oversight, that's really what has caused this problem now, I think, is that there was always someone to say, you can't do that. And that now has gone. Okay, I'm sorry to finish on such a dark note, but, we need to acknowledge the darkness. We cannot pretend that everything is light. This is the reality for America and the rest of the world. I'm grateful to you and for your efforts, and I hope that you and people such as yourself will continue to push the messaging of goodness in this fight, good against evil. For now, Sawyer Hacket, thank you for joining the Weekend Show.
Thanks for having me, Anthony.
I'm Anthony Davis. Don't forget to support me and independent journalism at patreon.com/5Minute News or by joining the 5 Minute News YouTube channel. I'll come back next Sunday with a brand new special guest and more factual news to discuss on the 5 Minute News Weekend Show with Midas Touch.